Do it.
And welcome back, you guys. This is episode, correct me if I'm wrong, 11 of the Bottomless Podcast. That is spelled BTTMLESS Podcast. We are on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. If you are a first-time listener, welcome, and we hope you stick around. If you are a return listener, welcome back, and you guys are like family, so thank you for coming back. We don't know why you're still here, but we thank you anyway. And so to get right into introductions, my name is Kevin, and these other two amazing, beautiful, lovely people are
Leslie.
And Lil V, Vincent. Yee.
I am from Floribama, Leslie is from Hawaii, and Vincent is from the hotbed of hell, Los Angeles, California. Isn't that what Emo Night says? Like we're
Well,
hell.
it's where we all live. We're not necessarily from there, but yeah, it's where we all.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's where we live.
I'm still in my month-long North Carolina sabbatical, so I'm reporting from the South.
And North Carolina is where we all met many years ago.
Yes. And for context, if anyone's like doubling back 20, 30 episodes later, the reason Vince is in North Carolina is because it is the Christmas holiday. It is holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So Vince is home spending time with the Rents.
Yeah, and I was losing my shit sitting in my apartment in LA every day, so I needed to change the scenery. So now I'm losing my shit in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Good, on brand with 2020. Have you guys heard about or seen? I know you're both on a little social media sabbatical. So, had you guys heard about the whole Harry Styles and Candace Owens thing that happened?
Yeah.
Have you seen the photos?
Yeah. I heard. I didn't get to see the back and forth on Twitter, unfortunately. I love a good online argument, but I definitely have heard about it.
Fuck Candace Owens. No context. Fuck Candace Owens.
Amen.
Well, I think it needs context. It could be taken
No.
in like a good way.
Outside of Harry Styles, fuck Candace. Candace Owens. If we ever get famous and you hear this, fuck your whole life, fuck your POV, fuck everything about you.
Wait, if we ever get famous, Candace, you're welcome to come on Bottomless Podcast.
No, you're not. Not with me. I won't be here.
Oh.
I won't be here. It won't be Bottomless. Fuck you, Candace.
Bring me on your podcast. I'd love to just to chat.
I'm gonna run in and start swinging on Vince for friendship.
I would pay.
Yeah.
So for people who hadn't seen what happened, basically Harry Styles was the first, I think he was the first man to be on the cover of Vogue. And in the cover shoot, he wore just a bunch of he wore like a dress, he wore really ruffly, just very flowy, very pretty clothes that is considered feminine. And there was quite a bit of support and oh, this is so beautiful. And then there's also quite a bit of tending to be on the conservative side backlash of oh no, they're destroying Western civilization, and if men aren't men, then everything's gonna fall apart. And Candace Owens and Candace Owens in particular tweeted, I can pull up the exact tweet from our trusted source BuzzFeed. She tweeted, "There's no society that can survive without strong men. The East knows this. In the West, the steady feminization of our men at the same time that Marxism is being taught to our children is not a coincidence. It is an outright attack. Bring back manly men." And then basically the last thing I saw was Harry Styles posted a picture. I was never a fan before this, honestly, but I am now. He posted a picture of him eating a banana and wearing some kind of ruffly clothes and was "Bring back manly man." That was his response, which I thought was quite lovely. So, what were your guys' thoughts when you saw the photos and just the dialogue that happened?
Come on, Vince. Come with it.
Not encouraging me. I know why she has a platform. It's just at this point, I don't think it's worth my time giving it any energy.
So obvious.
And it's not just the ideology, which the substance of it I'm glad to talk about, but it's coming from someone that clearly started making money, shifted her political opinions to pander to what is a shrinking part of our population that finds these conservative cultural issues top tier, big deal. So it's just like I'm over it. I'm not losing any sleep over it. I'm not mad that my grandma sees that and agrees with it because again, like that's like it's a shrinking population. But I mean, it's funny. Anytime someone says shit like the queers and the Marxists, it's like first define Marxism, second like the whole fall of Rome trope is so tired and boring. Like that's the idea like the gays took over Rome and feminized it and that's why it fell. Like it's the same thing. I'm bored. Literally
Amen.
bored.
Love it. Kevin?
Two things. I
We should
think
wait. Kevin and I should have wore a dress today. Dang it! But go ahead.
I
we
know.
should have. Before I get into my two things, I think it's funny that several years ago, and this has nothing to do with you guys. It's people like other friends in the hip hop ether that I exist in on Twitter and social media. Kanye West started wearing a kilt for one of his tours with Jay-Z called Watch the Throne. And of course, hip hop culture, which like the parts of hip hop culture that were homophobic, using the F word and saying queer and all these things. And I was the one person, of course, back at a church in a Bible college that was like, nah, fuck with it, just on a fashion tip. And people
Yeah.
are like, people have their opinions, demeaning and making fun of and not understanding. So time moves on. Young Thug wears a dress. He's a new rapper. At the time when he came out, wore a dress. Where wear dresses would use language on Instagram referring to Birdman, who I think was one of his partners at the time, helping him get into music. Use endearing terms like baby and all these things and boy or boo or whatever. I forgot who else. Some other rappers were doing it. And then fast forward to now, I forget who else I was going to highlight. But anyway, I remember always having
Uzi? Question mark.
Nah, Uzi does it too. Uzi has a little bit of play on that. It was probably. Oh, it was Daylight. He was a battle rapper. He said he wanted to have sex with P. Diddy. Like it was all this white. He was doing it to troll though. He was doing it to troll. He was using it for, and so at the time I hadn't started working out yet. And so I am an artist. So I understand like those elements that are considered culturally effeminate within our context of American Western society in 2020. And I'm drawn more towards those things that are stereotyped and stigmatized as effeminate. The way you dress a certain way, or if you're inclined to certain activities, whether it's cooking, sewing, art, aesthetics, beauty, of like flowers, the color pink.
So sad that you feel like beauty as a whole just
It's
if you
fucked
engage
up,
with
right?
that, you're like, you must be effeminate. Yeah.
Like it's a bunch of dudes who like
Damn.
it's a bunch of dudes walking around stink as shit with their nails fucked up, talking about like it's like gay to be. It's like, yeah, it's why your nails are fucked up and you stink. So then I no, dead ass, there's a bunch of raggedy ass dudes around here who that's why like you can't like bitches don't like you, bitches. So I started working out. And if anyone who works out understands that it helps you integrate a part of your subconscious called your aggression. And I understood
Your
that
ingression
element,
or aggression?
aggression. I understood this thing that again, our society, Western society, I'm not saying I agree with it nor endorse it nor stand by it, but I understood this for the sake of conversation, utilizing it as a tool. I understand this element of aggression that people often refer to as manly, like you're strong or you're aggressive or you can be violent or you're capable of expressing violence or anger or like physical force or brutality, or like you watch a football game, the need to like testosterone. So and I'm still working out. Like I'm still working out and I'm still writing poetry. I think I'm this my psychology is this unique combination of someone who understands very soft and intuitive and what is stigmatized as effeminate things, but I also understand like aggression and testosterone and violence and the desire to see like violent things happen, whether it's in real life with a fight or whether it's on a metaphorical
Throw back to the end of our empathy episode. Remember when we spent the whole time talking about empathizing with other people, and then you were like something about like blowing somebody's head off or something? I know you weren't serious.
No, I was serious. Or whether you see it like depicted in a representational sense, like on a football field, which is sports can be a representation of what can happen on a more severe level, like a war between two countries. So when I saw Harry Styles, and I saw it through Twitter, I think I saw a headline. Because of my first experience with Kanye and the kilt and my support, and Young Thug and the dress and my support, and my plucking my eyebrows since I was in 9th grade, and then me shaving my legs and me caring about like physical grooming standards and hair and my critique. And then also like when hip hop shifted to wearing skinny jeans and it would call you
We know
fat.
you loved that.
In high school, you would get called a faggot for wearing skinny jeans. And I literally went to Forever 21. I bought women's jeans because of the Brats. Shout out to the Brats. And because of like hip hop culture, I would put on
By
skinny.
the Brats, he means a group of friends that we all know in
Yeah.
North Carolina. Yeah.
And I put on women's jeans from Forever 21 because they was the only ones that give you the cut where it was tapered around the ankle. And I wanted that fit and that look that was more akin to a European man's style at the time. And so I remember arguing and debating with people about, hey, wait a minute. Like Christian, Republican, conservative. I was like, hey, where does the Bible say? Where does the Bible have like standards of what a man's dress looks like and what a woman's dress looks like? Because my point was there is no scripture, there is no rhetoric.
For women covering their heads and faces.
Exactly, but that's in a worship setting, right? In a public worship setting,
Yeah.
there's no biblical standard. So then my joke on them was like, hey, God didn't come down to do a fashion show and say, men, this is how you dress. The indication from the writer in that context was culturally, it's decided amongst the greater society what that is. And so in my head, I was like, well, then we're culture. The young people get to decide.
The young artists.
The young masses, the public gets to decide. So when I saw Harry doing this, it was funny to me because I would look at Candace and go, hey, like you realize Roman gladiators used to wear kilts and togas and flowy, long, dressy clothing, like people who would kill you. It's just that you've allowed the Western context in which we exist at this small blip in time that we live in, Candace Owens, to be the prescription, to be the diagnosis of what should be manly, when in time there were people like Romans who would kill people, like gladiators in a Colosseum, who would kill people or fight lions in that kind of clothing. But you just want to, again, like Vince said, continue to push your rhetoric within an ideology you exist in, and then look at Harry wearing a dress and go, we need more manly men. And I think it's a bait and switch of trying to feed on what society considers to be manly without actually defining it, and then begin to attack that caricature or that straw man argument on an unfounded basis, which I think is funny and ironic, and I think it's childish, to be honest.
I'm just looking at her tweet. It's so interesting too. Her follow-up, she was like, no society can survive without strong men. The East knows this. It's like, it seems so, I can't think of a better word, but ignorant to like other cultures. Like is that true? First of all, is East and West like a binary? Like is East one culture and West one culture? Because I'm pretty sure I can think of a lot of Western cultures that are very different than the US, and Eastern cultures are the same. Also, like, I don't know. It just seems so.
Also,
It seems like a parody of itself. I agree with what you said at the beginning, Vincent, where it's like, to me, I mean, yeah, I don't even think she necessarily even believes what she tweets. I think that she's completely like a machine that puts out the thing that will most appeal to like, yeah, a small part of the total conversation. But like the people who feel that way really feel that way. And so like they love her, you know? But were you gonna go ahead? Sorry.
Wait,
No, it's just bizarre. Like, I don't know. Like, I get it. I feel like maybe a decade ago I'd have been more sympathetic to it, even if I don't know if I would have agreed. But I also was like a teenager a decade ago. Like, I've read a book since. I don't know.
Well, this is our little warm-up. So without trying to drag it out too much, I do want to real quick reply. Just adding on, extending what Kevin was saying. Yeah, I remember when you wore your skinny jeans and like always liked that. I remember you wore them backwards too. But it's also a lot of what you were saying was like, well, don't you know men who wear flowy things can still kill people? It's also like the idea itself that men have to be aggressive, like, and that feminization, you said the stigma of feminization, as if being feminine itself is a bad thing and it's something that is a stigma, as opposed to like, maybe he is, according to what we've decided, like you mentioned, like in this specific time with our specific, you know, social and cultural factors, we've decided this is what it means to be feminine versus masculine. What if he is? Like, it's part of his fullness of being. Like, and those are just little containers we've built for the here and now right now. Like, it's not like there's a specific point here and point here. And the more he goes towards the idea of feminine, the less he is allowed to be anything, you know, or like that again, it's really set on the fundamental implied idea that like masculine is neutral or good for everyone. Because have you ever heard a big uproar about like a woman wearing a suit and everyone being like, oh no, it's an attack on women everywhere. If women go down, society is going, if women aren't women, what's going to happen? You know, I mean, obviously there's strains of that conversation with like trans women, but it's a separate type of thing, right? Where it's more just about like, oh no, like if we don't know, you know, there's not time to go into that conversation, but it's different. You see the difference, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like nobody's freaking out about women in the workplace or in any sense like adopting masculine, so to speak, air quotes, characteristics. If anything, it's encouraged and needed to survive in the workplace. Whereas if a man in the workplace were to wear something ruffly or whatever, you know, it would be like, wow, what are you doing, you know? So anyway,
It would be political. This is a
on that.
distraction. This is unprofessional.
Yeah.
Also, real quick, as an artist, Candace and anyone who thinks like Candace is not allowed, if you didn't help significantly contribute to the success, the evolution, the development, the establishment of where Harry Styles is today, you're not allowed to come in and come commentate. If you weren't there as a day one, if you weren't there as and even if you're only still a part and parcel, an atom in that ecosystem, go fuck yourself to think that. I doubt Candace Owens listens to Harry Styles, but even if she does, if you weren't there,
She
you
probably
didn't help.
secretly has like a whole playlist that's like a love-hate, like
It's true. It's true. But if she wasn't like a management or that day one team who helped him get to the success he has now, that him and his team hustling to get on the cover of Vogue, and you think because like you have a political opinion, you get to stand on your platform, fuck yourself. And it's just indicative of this American ideology that we think that we're the greatest country in the world and we can come and interfere and step in and like intervene in other countries and other it's so indicative
he's
of
not
this.
even American.
That's what I'm saying. It's just indicative of this American ideal that
shouting across the ocean.
We're the greatest, we're the best, and if we want to interfere and intervene on other people's issues and happenings, that we can. So it's like, dog, you didn't help get Harry on the cover of Vogue, so go fuck yourself to think you can have an opinion on it. Fuck you and fuck your whole ideology.
And it's weird her having that, like she does that, embodies that ideology. You would think that her lived experience as both being black and a woman would make her a little more hesitant to lean into that so heavy. But
I feel like we will talk about that today. Where, well, yeah. I mean, for a lot of people, it's easier, right, to lean into a system to find the ways that they can benefit from a system that overtly oppresses them. And I actually have some empathy for that. That makes sense, right? Like, yeah. I can see why it happened. Yeah. And then just on another quick note, I want to have time for our main topic today, which is patriarchy in the US, because obviously we're not even going to have time to really do it justice for our country that we all have experience in, let alone the world. But I did
every
just
pod
say,
episode we do ever.
Yeah.
Just scratch the surface.
But I did just want to say that I also saw that Elliot Page came out, I think it was last week, as a trans man, and I just think it's very beautiful. And if anyone hasn't taken the time to read his Twitter statement on it, I would just encourage you to. And you know, I know a lot of people, like probably some of our listeners, have like maybe unformed opinions or opinions that might not match mine. Like I very much am still learning. Like I don't pretend to have this, you know, perfect ideology and understanding of everything, but I think it's a beautiful opportunity for anyone who wants to like read that and just read it as a person sharing their truth. And it filled me with a lot of happiness.
Shout out Elliot.
Shout out Elliot.
Also, his partner is a brilliant and beautiful artist and dancer, so look up Emma Portner as well. Brilliant.
I didn't know that. Ooh, okay.
As the Christian on this podcast, Elliot, I love you. I think it's beautiful. And I, as a poet and as an artist and as a human being within my Christian circles, will be fighting for people like you to help try to shift the culture in which I exist, which is problematic white evangelical Christianity.
Such a heart-filling beginning to an episode. I love that.
Amen.
Now let's fuck it all up.
Lord be with us. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I wanted to start out by just kind of asking like how each of us define the patriarchy. And with that, just have you guys ever had an in-depth and explicit conversation about the patriarchy with anyone?
I know a setup when I see one. Vince, you go first.
Okay, that's fine. It's
I've
not a
been in the
setup.
hood. I've been in the hood with a car creeps
Why
down
would
the
that be
street,
a
and
setup?
the headlights cut off, and you're like, oh shit! And the car starts speed, and dudes jump out the car and beat you up and shoot you. I know a setup when I Vince, you go first.
No, I think Kevin and I both want to be mindful. The dynamic of Leslie being the woman in this episode, I think there's just some anxiety that will step forward.
1,000%.
Oh, I
But
felt that way, and it actually makes. Well, I know you guys know I felt that way as
Yeah.
revealed in my. But
Yeah.
had you already thought about that before?
it's not that much anxiety, but I've been thinking a lot about just my conversations in the past. So to answer your question, actually, on that note, I have thought about the patriarchy. I have like a loose definition. That I'm curious how it lines with yours, but like basically like a policy, institution, systems, cultural and socialization, like that whole, all of that, that like reinforces that hierarchy where men are on top. Like that's probably a super reductive version. Have I talked about it? Not. That's the thing that gives me anxiety is I realize that as I think I'm at a decent place relative, but I haven't really had explicit conversations with women in my life as much as I would have liked. And actually, the only real conversation I could think of was with you, Leslie, years ago, which I would love to. I don't know if you remember that
Which
conversation.
one? I feel like we've had a few. Which one was it?
I do know, and this is just me being again pretty honest because I'm more than happy to go to bat with my opinions today. But let's say 5 years ago, Vincent, I think you and I had a conversation about gender. It was like through a very narrow lens of um, pay inequality.
Mm.
And at that time, I was just thinking through that argument. I don't think I really tied it to a broader conversation. And then I think we've had subsequent conversations around like gender, which I don't want to take us off. That could be a future episode, like
For
gender,
sure. That's
especially
definitely a season
transgenderism.
2. See, like
Yeah,
we've been talking about like the level up in season 2. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so definitely haven't talked about it as much as I want. I think my lived experience and just being close with women in general means that I'm pretty empathetic to these kind of conversations, but it's scary sometimes to be like, yo, tell me about the
Hey,
patriarchy.
girl,
And
you want
also
to talk?
and also tell me about the ways that I may or may not have been complicit without realizing it.
Oh,
Like
yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Oh,
I could just see all my friends that are women just gearing up the text right now to curse me out on my misogyny throughout the years.
I think that all of our friends, men, women, non-binary people, I think all of them will appreciate this conversation. Because I do think it just gets talked about less in everyone's lives than it's like, and then when you think about it, it's like, wait a second, like we don't talk about this. And I think there will probably be great conversations that come out of this. What about you, Kevin?
So my definition of it, and then have I ever talked about it? Have I ever talked about it? No. I will say where I stand today, December, whatever it is, 2020, is a result of people like Kanye West, Dave Chappelle, Joe Budden, specifically Joe Budden, because he constantly says on his podcast, like, yeah, like he doesn't touch on certain things because he believes as a man he has no business touching on women's subjects. And so there's a caution, there's a sensitivity, there is a deferment of like, yeah, I can talk about this if I'm asked by women, but like it's just so cringe. A bunch of men a bunch of men with other men having conversation about issues that affect the life and rights and livelihood and mental health of what. So my definition, I didn't look it up, and I purposely didn't look it up because I've heard the term in discussion, and just by way of context, thought I knew what it meant. So I'll try my best to say what I think and kind of what I've inferred to it to mean, because I think this is what a lot of people infer it to mean.
Well, I
It's
really appreciate that you're doing this, Kevin. Thank you. Because not a lot of people would. They'd be scared. Yeah.
I should read from dictionary.com. Webster said, the way it was presented to me, it sounds like it's the reality in which men and women both exist, where it's primarily, if not entirely, men dominated by virtue of social class, like even by virtue of social class, within the context of family, within the context of relationship. So all the way down from the way single women are treated by single men, or daughters are treated by their fathers or by their brothers, all the way up to in a hierarchical organizational business level. So it goes from social all the way to business and professional, where men at every single breakdown of those organizations or ecosystems, men are dominant, men are in power, men are the highest, men are the god, men are the utmost, men are the primary. Their definition of morals, ethics, and the status quo rings above all, and can never be questioned, can never be attacked, can never be rallied against. Otherwise, it'll be met with harsh retaliation. And as a result, and as a consequence, in a lot of ways, it's led to a very unfair, undignified, unkind, problematic, hurtful, dysfunctional existence for women and for men who don't either identify as men or who just don't wish to live within that existence. That's, as I heard someone who expressed it, who was actually critiquing it, I tried to understand it from the side of the opposition of that person, and that's kind of the conclusion that I came to of what it is. And that I tried as my best to try to understand it as if I was trying to hear it from the voice of an oppressed person, by someone who was oppressed as a victim of that system. But I'm open to the idea of like my definition being wrong, faltered, flawed, incoherent, like correct me in the places that I've fallen short of trying to express that idea or just left out pieces.
Well, I don't feel like I'm in a position to offer any correction on this talk. I can offer like my honest perspective and experiences.
Don't be humble.
Don't be
Well,
humble.
I'm, kind of similar to what we, oh my gosh, RIP. It's kind of similar to what I said on our now lost episode that we recorded and didn't save.
And
when
we told you then, don't be humble.
I am an expert on my own lived experience, right? And I am a woman, but also like I'm not a feminist scholar or theorist. So once again, I'll just preface it with that. And there's lots of room in this conversation for lots of perspectives. I think there are some obvious like pillars of, can we all agree on this? But lots of room. My definition, so in preparation for this episode, I did some like basic research, like, not too intense, but I culled together like a definition from a couple different sources that just put language on what I already thought it to be. It's just, it was like nice little containers for truths I have known for, I don't know, about the time you start knowing most things about life, right? Like it's been a long time. And we can get into that more later because I do have a question about like when we first started becoming aware. But basically, patriarchy are societies and systems of society in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. Men dominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, constructing history, which is a big one, cultural narratives, control of property. And then obviously, I wouldn't say this is the case in America, although some people would. I mean, I see the argument for it being the case, but much more the case in some other contemporary societies that men explicitly dominate, oppress, and exploit women. So that's my definition. And as far as having conversations, I do think I've had tons of conversations with my friends who are women. I do feel like I'm often that friend who's a woman in my friends who are men's lives who tends to talk about these things, tends to be the one that's like, oh, I haven't, my friends who are women haven't brought this up or whatever. And just also as a result of like having been in several jobs now, like I've also had to have this conversation in those settings because at literally every job I've ever had, there's been a case of sexual harassment where the management did not handle it and I stepped in. So yeah.
What?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just curious, you mentioned like you've had this conversation a lot.
Not this conversation.
Okay. I was just curious,
Yeah.
what was the conversation in general? And then also, I don't know if you remember, but I'm curious. You've had a conversation with me. I'm curious from your perspective how those were, or even like what we talked about. I'm sure that was informed by the dynamics by me, by you. I'm just curious. What have your previous conversations look like?
So I think that a lot of my previous conversations, because I didn't really use the term explicitly patriarchy until probably like a year and a half ago, around the time I was starting to deconstruct. And I haven't even all the way figured out why. I think probably a large, obvious part of it is just that language is so frowned upon within conservative Christian culture. And it wasn't that I agreed with the way it was frowned upon, it was that I'd rather actually communicate with people. And I knew that if I were to explicitly use that word, a lot of people would shut their ears. A lot of people in my close circles, because once again, leading up to my deconstruction, that community had turned into like my primary, like the people in my day to day. And so I don't know, it looks like a million ways, you know, like, but as far as this type of conversation where we're just focused on it, no, it was more like specific incidents were happening, or I would just be thinking about something and I would kind of be like, hey guys, like, let's talk about this. But this is definitely going to be the most like intentional, and with, you know, two of my super close friends who I really trust and like admire and respect. But I do think it's important to say, and then I promise this is just my main thing I wanted to say at the beginning for myself, and I think for like all women listening, because I don't think this gets talked about either, is how much anxiety I had coming into this conversation, like you guys mentioned you did. And just like I really feel like everyone needs to sit with that and realize that that's a thing, that I had so much anxiety when I'm just talking to two of my closest friends who I know respect women, who respect me. Um, and I just had so much anxiety because it was honestly like kind of triggering trying to think about leading, so to speak, a conversation when I have just had so many experiences of being belittled and dismissed and not listened to, when I'm having to have much smaller versions of this conversation, you know, in personal life and once again in work life. Like, yeah, I've had the conversations, but in one, the manager just straight up was like, well, let's just not talk about this. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, you know that it was well intent, like, you know that they wouldn't really do anything right. And at that time I was in high school, so I was just like, okay. And then in the next one, I told my direct report. She said that I should, well, let's just wait, and like if it happens again. Several months later, like there were still just things I was not okay with. And so I initiated to sit down with, you know, like I recorded the whole conversation too, secretly in my pocket, because I wasn't about to get fired over this. You know, like I feared retaliation. I was the first one who had ever said anything. And I found out in preparation, like 3 other women in the office had similar experiences and hadn't said anything because they feared retaliation. Or if not retaliation, they didn't want to be seen as an uptight woman who was just overly sensitive, which is what I cannot understand, why there's just, it's so obvious the line between like harassment and like, of course you can flirt with women and of course you can, anyway, that's a side tangent. But yeah, like, yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you guys for being the type of friends to where I could overcome that anxiety, because I do think if you guys were less of wonderful people that you are, I might not have, like, I might have just been like, you know what, I can't do this, especially at the end of 2020. Like, I actually asked a friend who I would have asked you guys, like, you know, I had floated the idea, like, I'd kind of like to have another woman. Again, not because of you specifically, but it does make a big difference when you have another person in the room that just can understand, right? Like your experience from a first person, especially when you have such a history of just not really being heard, when it takes so much energy to talk about anyway. And that person was like, no, like it's, if I try to talk about it, it's the end of 2020. I'm going to be enraged and
Not
like,
today,
and
Satan.
yeah, you know, it's like, okay, I totally understand. So anyway, that is my little speech on that. And real quick, sorry, to answer, Vincent, your question. The main conversation I remember us having, the pay gap conversation, the only thing I remember is you encouraged me like, hey, you should definitely like ask for a raise because, you know, you work in like recruitment and you're like, I see that like women tend to not ask, like men so more often ask for raises.
Oh
But which
yeah.
I don't.
I that's a later conversation. I do remember that though. Which, plug for any women listener. Actually, plug for anyone. Always negotiate your pay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, never take your first offer as a recruiter. That's a Just FYI. But this was an earlier conversation. I think we probably were early 20s, and I think at that time there was just a little bit of discourse in our circles, which at that time was predominantly white evangelical Christian, about there's like been an effort to debunk the pay gap between men and women. Which, I mean, I don't know if we want to get into that this episode, but I think I was chewing over because some of it made sense in retrospect. I think it makes sense from like a limited understanding, but I'm just being honest. Like I was entertaining it. I was like, oh, like maybe this pay gap thing is being a bit overstated and, you know, dismissive, etc., etc. But I think I was expressing it to. Oh well, I just outed myself.
I don't. I blocked it out. No, I'm kidding.
But if anything, I ask what your thoughts were because I think Leslie's really good at just creating space for people to feel comfortable talking about those things. I just hope that it wasn't like you're listening like this dumb motherfucker is talking to me.
No, see, that's the thing is if I felt that way, I would have said it. And I wouldn't have called you a dumb motherfucker, but I would have been like, you know, I would have. We know. But I will quickly acknowledge that the main one that stands out to me, Vincent, Kevin, I don't think you and I ever have, but that's also because, you know, there was like a period where we lost touch and weren't talking. But Vincent, the main one I remember and really appreciate to this day was when Kavanaugh was being nominated and all that was happening. And I called you and I feel like it was like 2 hours. And I just really kind of vented to you about not how it's not even to me so emotional because it's about whether I believe yes or no he did what he was being accused of doing. It was the complete lack of empathy for the way that this nationally spotlighted case was affecting every single woman I knew, myself included, because it was like maybe he didn't, but just the automatic vitriol against the woman, the automatic disbelief, the automatic assumption by so many people, and again, majority people who were in my group at the time, conservative Christians, where it was like, oh, see, she must just be having like political motivation. And it's like I understood that and I was able to create space. It was like, you know, it wasn't cut and dry the way some people were making it, but at the same time it was as it, you think of any, right? Think of anything that's happened this year where it's like, just have some fucking empathy. Like, how can you be so unaware of how many women have been in lesser versions of this or the exact same version? Like, I think the statistics is like 1 in 4 women are either sexually assaulted or raped in their lifetime. Like, have some fucking awareness. Like, so anyway, and I really appreciate it because you just like listened and we're like very, I mean, yeah,
I do remember that. Yeah. I think it's interesting. Also, I don't want this to turn into like a psychoanalysis of Leslie's.
Yeah.
Actually, she's due us a psychoanalysis of her brain. But I do think it's interesting too how well you create space and how asymmetrical that space is. In the case of Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Ford, in that I think I don't speak for you today. I think today, at least for me, like, do we even deserve to give people space to question her immediately, like you did? But they don't even give her space that it could possibly be true, right? Like, it's such an asymmetrical. Like, even with you giving space, you're just kind of acquiescing to them and their assumptions. That even though it's painful for you, which is, I don't know, it's just fucked up.
Yeah, but
real story is fuck them. Never mind. Go ahead.
I feel like, okay, so yeah, for anyone watching on YouTube, I'm just referencing, I did kind of have a little more notes than usual because I think this is such a valuable conversation and want to get to some things. But I had the question of like, have you heard women in your lives express similar sentiments, which I feel like you already kind of addressed, but you can if you want. And then the more interesting follow-up question is like, can you guys relate to the feeling of what I just expressed about anxiety around talking about this topic for any topics in your lives? And if so, like, how have you handled choosing to talk or not talk about those topics?
Vince is, for our podcast listeners, Vince is motioning with his lips for me to go first. I'm so upset. Yes, and up until March of this year, I wouldn't have been able to because George Floyd didn't happen yet, and I had a series of conversations and discourses between myself as recent as this past week with the executive pastor of my church. and there was a series of conversations and discourses by which every single conversation was preceded with anxiety and stress, because I was now belonging to a demographic and a collective of persons of the Black community by which I was choosing to stand with, and the supporters who were choosing to stand with them. I was now a supporter who was choosing to stand with them, and I felt in part the anxieties that came with sounding fucking crazy. And it makes me think back to a Black coworker I used to work with at a predominantly white organization, who explained to me as a young 22-year-old, Kevin.
Who's a bad bitch. Hopefully that's appropriate for the
What?
patriarchy episode. Oh, I know who you're talking about.
This was a male.
Oh, I thought you said a Black woman. I thought you were talking about someone else.
No, I said a. So the male.
You know what? He's probably a bad bitch too.
He is a bad bitch.
Amen.
He was like, Kevin, as a Black male, we always have to appease and adapt to the white man's organization. And he was like, part of that is when you express your anxieties, your fears, your worries, your concerns, the things that are egregious violations, they're met with skepticism and doubt and disbelief. And so as a 29-year-old, I now was on the other side of that table, because I listened to him and I was like, yeah, it makes sense, but I've never personally experienced it. And then I was walking into multiple conversations with my pastor, with other people in that organization that I currently exist in, and now with my executive pastor, with deep, like there was a time where I was driving out to that organization, and I told this to my executive pastor this past week. I was crying in the car because I didn't want to go. Just the sheer overwhelming anxiety and stress of having to go and talk and feeling like I'm going to be viewed as crazy and my opinions are going to be invalidated. I'm not even Black. I was weeping in my car. Everything in my soul, like the little child inside of me, was like, all I want to do is turn around, drive home, get under my blanket and weep for hours because I don't want to fucking do this. So yeah, hearing Leslie say like the sheer and utter angst and anxiety of just even trying to talk about this, it is overwhelming. It's a labor, and it's difficult. It's fucking exhausting. I think about this therapist that I listen to who says like, when you cause someone to relive a traumatic experience and they start crying, it's because there's like they're quite literally reliving that experience. So to force someone for Leslie to have to go and I just have a lot of respect and reverence for the fact that she put herself through an emotionally traumatic and roller coaster of an experience just to have this conversation. Like, and that alone should bear gravity on any male listener of like, hey, these aren't light things. These aren't easy things. And in that aspect, Leslie, at least I can attempt to relate and empathize, because on the side of me trying to vocalize my thoughts on Black Lives Matter movement and all these social injustices as pertains to the relationship between Black persons and cops in this country, I understood the idea of holding a stance, holding a shared existence or reality, trying to not necessarily campaign, because campaign sounds so crude, but trying to speak up on behalf of that reality, and then knowing that there's like an army of millions who like it's their job, fucking Fox News, it's their job to create rhetoric and books and content and campaigns and speeches and songs and movies to purposefully discredit, deconstruct, and try to do away with what you're saying as a valid lived reality. So yeah, I do.
Now imagine being a Black woman, as
Yeah,
Vincent mentioned earlier. Candace, I'm
no.
like, oh, so much to come up
No.
against. Anyway.
Now retweet Kevin. I think George Floyd is a good place. I feel like the weekend I was pretty unemotional and I like cracked Monday. I didn't crack because of the death. Like it happens daily. Like welcome to reality. I literally feel like I remember cracking and being upset because it felt like there was this there was so much like counter momentum to even have the conversation to like bring people to the reality of like racial injustice. I think that's the power of intersectionality, right? Like I feel like it creates space to empathize with different struggles, because I think if you're part of any oppressed group, there's that anxiety of like, oh, if you're not a part of the status quo, it takes emotional labor to bring these conversations up because naturally they won't come up. Like me talking about reparations and overthrowing capitalism, like I sound like a crazy Black Panther, like black anarchist, and it's like, no,
We
these
love that.
which I'm
Season
getting
2.
which I'm getting
Season 2.
more secure with, but like still, like no, I still super shy away from presenting myself as someone that's just can't help himself to bring up race all the time or bring up capitalism. Like I feel like I empathize with that, which is also why I have anxiety, because it's you and then two of us.
Aw. Wow. Yeah, thanks. Wow, I love hearing you guys' awesomeness. And I don't have anxiety as much right now because I feel like I kind of worked through it. And for the record, like Kevin and Vincent, you guys didn't like bully me into this or anything. Like I think it came up
Oh no,
several
we did.
times.
Like
Yeah, they were like, tell us about the patriarchy.
yeah.
But I also like really wanted to anyway, because I've just been thinking how I want to like just form more uh have more formed thoughts and channels, and that way my conversations can get richer and my impact can also be more uh substantial in this area. So it was good, like and I love what you said about intersectionality, Vincent, and I so agree, and also think it's important for me to say, because you guys brought up the murder of George Floyd, like it's that empathy is so important, but also like it's so important to recognize like just because you're a woman doesn't mean like you can understand, like just because different oppressed groups can understand the basic feeling of like not being the dominator or in whatever sense, like I can't understand how Black people felt, after George Floyd was killed, and I can't completely understand the experience of a Black woman, not even close, because she deals with an intersectionality that is much more oppressive than I do in this country as an Asian woman. So I want to say that. Not that there's, the whole oppression Olympics things. It's not that, but I do think it's important to acknowledge. So before we talk about kind of when we each became aware of it and began to think about the patriarchy, I quickly wanted to share knowledge that's new to me, again, after my deconstruction, like just learning about the evolution of humans and societies. And I just think it's really interesting that basically the first modern humans appeared 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. And then they started migrating out of Africa 70,000 to 100,000 years ago, developed language about 50,000 years ago. And then as far as, anthropologists can tell, most of these societies were basically egalitarian until the end of the last ice age, which was 10 to 12,000 years ago. And that's also when agriculture became a thing. So that feels like really important context, right? Especially in the way that we tend to view our tiny little blip in time as like, well, this is how things always are. This is just the natural way. So yeah, that being said, for you guys, I'm really curious, like if there's a defining moment or something when you first were like, oh, like are men and women treated equally in society, or just kind of a phase of life when you started thinking about it and noticing it.
I don't think I have a specific point in time, but I think my teenage years I begin to notice it as related to like my loved ones in my family, just seeing the difference in how men and women are treated. Also, we're not going to relitigate the past 7 episodes about Christianity, but I grew up in a very conservative household, in a very conservative bubble. I think what's a bit unique to me though, which is why I was excited to talk about this as our mix, is that I think there's also like when you unpack men, women, there's a hierarchy within it. And I've never been like the like super bravado machismo top of that hierarchy. And I think growing up, I even felt more hostile to those kind of people. So I didn't gravitate to the real tops of the fucking Fred Flintstones of the hierarchy, if you will.
The people who most benefit, right, from
Exactly.
the men
Yeah.
who, yeah.
So in general, I would be more in proximity to less bravado on the hierarchy, as well as just in general more women. If we're like the women are on bottom of the men, I'm just a little bit closer to the women. So I think it was an interesting lived experience because I think I've been socialized with a lot more women outside the context of like romantic relationships. So I think that also informed my awareness of just the difference in how they're like women could be treated, also how they relate to each other as well as how men relate to each other, which is just I think a different perspective than some men. Um, but yeah, I would say around my teenage years, I began to have words for it, but it definitely wasn't patriarchy. I think my intro to patriarchy was from that conservative vantage point of like the radical crazy feminists screaming about the patriarchy, with God forbid their hairy armpits and their godless theory. you know, just that was my vantage point. But because I was socialized with women, I don't think I internalized it as deeply, so that it was constantly being challenged. So it didn't, hopefully, plant too many roots. Hopefully, again, I can just see my women friends getting their texts ready to curse me out.
Well, at what point, just to finish your arc, that's really beautiful. At what point did it switch into being like, okay, well, were fed these messages that you didn't really internalize, but then, and you said, you didn't name it patriarchy. Like, at what point did you, or have you?
Yeah, I feel like maybe around deconstruction, I begin to build in vocabulary to describe these things. But again, I'm just being honest. Like, I've read and listened and consumed a lot of theory around economics, around race, also about gender. Um, haven't really got too deep into like feminist theory, which this is like a sidebar. I also noticed in my notes that when we decided to make this episode, my first thought was like, oh, I haven't read any theory, as opposed to, oh, I need to talk to my women friends, which I think in itself is probably problematic, just being honest. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm relatively new to just saying it for what it is, the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Feels good to say, right? Right? Well, does it? I mean, for me, it's
Yeah. No, yeah.
guys, right, guys?
It does feel good to not care, like to not have the anxieties of like, oh, I sound like a crazy fucking, I don't know, whatever, feminist or whatever. It's not even patriarchy. Just to be clear, like growing up, I don't know if you guys felt this too. I was saying feminist too. Like being a feminist in itself was like, you must be one of those.
It's so crazy because it's so crazy how, especially in conservative Christian bubbles, it's like feminist equals like anti-man, as opposed to like taking 1 second of your life to look up the definition and like even the problem was even acknowledging there was hierarchy, let alone wanting to like push back against it. It was like, how dare you? When literally in conservative Christian bubbles, God is a man, all the prophets are men, all the kings are men, all the books are written by men. We have like maybe 2 books, maybe those were still written by men. Like, how?
And if you can get them to admit there's a hierarchy, it's, well, that hierarchy is as God intended.
Is ordained. Yeah. Anyway.
What was the initial question again?
Sorry, I went.
When did I become aware of it, and when did I actually start using the vernacular patriarchy, or just when did I become aware of it?
Kind of both. I mean, yeah. When did you become aware, and then sort of like where you are now, like?
You know what? Honestly, through us trying to, I think it was when Leslie attacked me about Hamilton.
Ooh,
that was a good conversation. Yeah.
So like literally, Leslie is definitely, and I'm gonna say words, but you guys have to take out. You guys have to let me determine what those words mean. Leslie is the most opinionated woman, the most vocal, the most outspoken woman that I've had this close of a friendship with. So she as I'm just conversating, dialoguing, discoursing, bantering with Leslie as we're preparing to even launch this idea of a podcast, things that are coming out of my mouth that don't have the POV of a woman included in it. She's just giving her commentary and her feedback and her footnotes. And it really, it really colored in my mosaic of like, shit, I 29 years of my life. It's almost like I'm a recovering, I'm trying to look for a word that is like someone.
Well, you are heavily socialized. We all are.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of like someone who's a perpetuator of like a patriarchal system. But consider me that, and then consider me a recovering version of that. So like I'm still now spending 29 years of like shit, I'm trying to adjust and recover and become better adjusted to not the culture that I fell victim to, which is a patriarchal culture for 29 years of my life. And what I will say is, like, not to like sound like some fucking cowering pansy, there are things, I think Vince can agree with this, maybe not. There are things which in the Black Lives Matter movement, I support it as a movement. There are things in it that on some people have used the Black Lives Matter movement in ways and used the banner of it to do very and I won't list in detail, some very problematic, hurtful, just destructive things. Mind you, I was the person who was like agreeing with riots. But outside of that, there are people in the Black Lives Matter movement who have done things that are very problematic, dysfunctional, and hurtful to the movement. But then they use the term Black Lives Matter, and it can be hurtful to Black Lives Matter. In the same way, I think there can be people who do things in a way, use the term or the banner of feminism, and because their voices are very loud and very widespreading and long-reaching, people just your general audience member like me who isn't really looking too deep into it just goes, oh, that's feminism. The way a lot of conservative Christian problematic evangelical whites will look at Candace Owens and go, oh, that's a woke Black person. So to say that, what I'm trying to say is I think there are things which in feminism that I don't think maybe not all feminists would agree with, and therefore there are things with that those kind of feminists would point to patriarchy and go, yeah, this, and I go, I don't see a problem with that. But then there are things that I go, yeah, no, there's very legitimate concerns here, and there's very legitimate grievances that as a society we've just perpetuated and been a part of the system for so many years, and that they need to be fixed and addressed. And even if there are things that I look at and go, yeah, that's those, no, like you're overreactive. I think even in that realm, there's space for me and humility on my part, even if I think it's right, for me to sit down and go, okay, as a gut reaction, I don't think anything's wrong there, but I'm still a male. So I'm open to the idea of you sitting down for the next 3, 5, 10, 20, 25 years and you going, no, let me if we need to, let me slow walk you through these thoughts and why like this isn't okay. But it became widely aware to me once I started having conversations with Leslie. It got introduced to me when in Christian cultures, people talked about the pronouns used within the Bible, which I understand why that is, and within Eastern Hebrew and Middle Eastern culture, which only got highlighted, when I spent a year and a half learning the Arabic language and why not Hebrew, Arabs, which the Bible is written in Hebrew and Greek, why Arabs use pronouns he or she the way they do. So that became more of my forefront of my mind of like, oh, I can see as a woman, if I had to grow up in this culture, not even all things Leslie was mentioning of how the kings and the prophets and how it's all predominantly male, or if not entirely male, predominantly male, but even in the pronouns of how it's like adopted as sons. It doesn't say adopted as sons and daughters, it says adopted as sons. Even God's relationship with Adam, not with Adam and Eve, God's relationship with Adam and having to disseminate to Eve from Adam. I can see how in so many ways, by having to study Arabic for a year and a half, after spending so much time in the Christian culture and understanding and hearing rhetoric about why the Bible was written the way it was written, how as a woman, you would sit there and go, you don't like, can't you see how I feel marginalized and left out and not thought of and an afterthought, if not even an afterthought, like almost like this stepchild who like you guys didn't want here in the first place. And then I try to speak up and it's like, I'm more of a burden and an annoyance rather than like a valued member of this family, an equal part and parcel of this family just as much as anyone else. So there was moments like the Bible, like studying Arabic for a year and a half, like Kanye West, Jay-Z, Will Smith becoming fathers of daughters, and in their music or in their content, Jay-Z would say things like, it took me having a daughter to see from a woman's perspective. Kanye West saying, it took me having a daughter to see women as something to nurture, not something to conquer. It took Will Smith going, I had to spend time with Willow and her just being so like very strong in her personhood of like not wanting to let Will Smith fit her into the cultural constructs of what it should mean to like just be daddy's little girl and her just being independent, and him having to be like, oh, I'm going to see her as like a plant. And if you come in and try to force a flower to become like a bush or a tree to become a vine, if you try to force these things to become something they're not, they're going to like, it's going to shrivel and die, and you're going to see the consequences of your actions. So it's not your job to control the plant or to dictate what the plant becomes. It's your job to provide the best possible environment and soil and nurturing and health and care for that plant to become what it's naturally supposed to become, not to interfere and invade and impose your own. So it was like hip hop culture, Jay-Z, Kanye, Will Smith, ironically, the consequence of being so inundated to Christian culture and then having to step back and go, wait a minute, like there's something wrong. And then also studying Arabic for a year and a half and going, oh, like I totally see how this is a problem of like how literature, and me being a poet and so infatuated with literature, how such a male-centric focus within Hebrew and Arab culture can be so problematic if you are a woman, and how for so long of my life I just never thought of it. I never read those texts of the Bible and thought to myself, man, this is really like, this could be hurtful to women. This could be hurtful if you're not a he, if you're not a son, if
It's
you're not a,
also problematic if you're a man because
well, you don't,
it
if you're
makes you
trained to not
miss
see
out
it.
on. Well, yeah, but I'm just saying it hurts men too
Agreed.
because how sad that you're missing out on a perspective of half of the world and the
Agreed.
perspective of people who bring life into the world with the help of
Agreed.
men. But we are like, how sad that how sad once again that you feel like you have to say like all these things that are womanly, like beauty and kindness
Yeah.
and care and like how sad that
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like your history is written by people who have historically been associated with, it's like, well, to be a man is that yeah, so yeah.
Yeah. So that was pretty much it. And then also like, yeah, just the Bible, the Arabic, the hip hop, and then yeah, the idea of like me having conversations with Leslie about things that are very important to me, like Hamilton or like dating or like just multiple facets of my life that mean very much to me. It wasn't until this year that I had a living, breathing heartbeat on the other side of my POV, helping me to work through.
Did you have? Never mind.
Nah, what's up? What's up? Nah, what's up? Nah, what's up? No.
No.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Let's leave that off.
As opposed, yeah, never mind.
The Hamilton thing was fun. I actually think we do have that recorded somewhere. And it was basically, yeah.
I think it was a post-pod discussion. If you guys don't know, we like to talk a lot. So before and after, we just spin our wheels for hours.
Little marathons. But anyone who has already thought about this will know what I'm saying. It was about the musification of women and how that relates to like the storyline in Hamilton, which is a great show.
Which Leslie fucked me up on because like that's my bread and butter, right? My poetry. If you know my poetry, that's what I do. That's what I perpetuate, baby. I'm going to musify. So Leslie, like as a loving, caring woman in my life, was like, hey, like, just so you understand the perspective of someone who like may not enjoy that, like this is my thought. And I was like, oh shit, I never like, okay, I got to adjust.
Season 2, because there's a lot there. Like I don't think, there's nothing wrong with the idea of being inspired by somebody. But anyway, yeah. Okay, so
wait, what about you?
Yeah, what about you?
Me?
When did you come to the realization of it and start using it?
I forgot. Sorry.
Well, obviously you mentioned that saying patriarchy, like deconstruction, but like when did you start perceiving these things?
I would just say that it's inextricable from just when I started, when like as a child develops, right? They develop, like I don't remember a specific starting point. I feel like I always noticed it, and it was just part of my. Now, as far as like talking about it and naming it, and maybe I noticed it, but it also did feel naturalized. And I had a specific phase in my life where I think it was like early college, where I was grappling with like, because I remember grappling with the idea that like this is just how God ordained things to be, because I had not felt that way and I had always felt bothered. But then I had a conversation with a Christian woman who I really, really respected, and who in my mind just most fully embodied out of anyone I had seen what I saw Jesus as embodying, which was like such a self-sacrificing love and genuine care, and in a way that puts yourself on the line and is invested in like love in action. And she was like, I've just kind of come to peace where like I'm okay with being less than, because like I don't like, it's sort of framing it as like a pride issue where it's like it doesn't matter, and also like in the kingdom we'll all be the same. And I was just so like, oh man. So I spent a little bit of time thinking about that, and I was like, okay, no, I don't feel that way. But yeah, I don't know. That's the thing. It's like there's not a specific starting point. I've always noticed it. And part of it is also, my dad is Korean, and Korean, especially from his generation, is much more overtly patriarchal.
Talk
So
about
I
it.
have had conversations and experiences that do differ a lot from, like white women friends that I have, where it's like, oh, part of your experience with the patriarchy wasn't this. It's like, no. So, and my dad is very awesome and loving, and I have a lot of respect for him as well. But yeah, there wasn't a specific start stop. I think now though I'm hitting my stride of, and even this conversation, right, is part of my desired work to like, I think it's very, I'm learning about a lot of things right now, as I think we all are, and as I think a lot of people are as a result of 2020. And for me, it's like, this is an area I have so many opinions on, not by virtue of like having wanted to be a loudspeaker. It's just like I care a lot about truth and I care a lot about relationships. And so if you're in a relationship with somebody, like, you have to know enough of your truth to share it, and hopefully they together, right, you help each other share more and more of your truths, and that helps expand out into like how you see the rest of the world. So this is an area that obviously has like relational but also very real life consequences of being able to share my truth and being able to hear people around me's truths. And as we round the bend on this hour that we're hitting so far, I wanted to end by asking, again, as I was preparing, there's like so many thoughts, but I was trying to think of like, okay, we're talking about like the broad thing of it, but what's something I have been wrestling with, right, in relation to patriarchy at this point in my life? And at this point of, I feel like being more explicit in the way I talk about things, and my experiences and just the system itself, right? Because it's much bigger than like one person's individual experiences. Something I keep not understanding, and I'd love to hear your guys' perspectives, is like, I'll just read my list of questions. Why is it so hard for people to accept a woman who works to combat the patriarchy and dresses and expresses herself sexually however she wants? Which sounds like, right, kind of, but the vast majority of cases, it's so hard for people to see a woman who might be read as like, in whatever ways, typically like sexy or something like that, like attractive, and she knows it and she's like comfortable with that and even wants to lean into it, and also though doesn't want to be sexually harassed and knows that the patriarchy is real and is going to push. It's so crazy to me why, like, and even me saying it, because I've been so conditioned, it's almost hard for me, unless I concentrate, to just realize how bizarre it is that we can't hold both of those things, together. um why is the assumption so often that if a woman rejects the patriarchy in explicit or implicit ways, she rejects men? Why is it that if she likes to show her body and have sex however often she wants with whoever she wants, then she must not really want to be respected as a human, or must be catering to the male gaze? um she doesn't, I kind of already said this, but yeah, she doesn't want to be sexually harassed, then she's frigid and unapproachable, or like suddenly it's like, oh no, she said that something I did made her uncomfortable, well now I just don't even know how to act. I can't flirt with her, I can't. It's like there's no in between, like, come on. And also,
Nope.
what? And also, like, there's not room to just, if you do something that makes a woman uncomfortable, you're not suddenly a rapist. Like, if she tells you that, she's not calling you an abuser. Like, she's just telling you made her uncomfortable. And like, yeah. So anyway, it's like, why is it such a trigger for such an extreme, like, you see those memes of like men who won't even like touch a woman, like won't even like put, which that's
Like,
also
I'm thinking of Mike Pence, who wouldn't meet with like a woman staffer without his wife present.
Amen. Accountability, brother. Amen. He did the right thing.
Oh,
yeah. And then the last one was basically just like, why do these judgments and gymnastic courses that we force women through, and that women force women through in many cases, because once again, you don't have to be part of the oppressive class to participate in the oppressive system, why do they all center on approving, disapproving, and controlling women's sexuality? Like, and this is just something I'll pull in closing from my word vomit of 5 more pages below that we're not going to get to, but like, it's this bizarre thing of women and their bodies in particular being like, so like, from the minute you're like a girl, like you're told like, it's like you're so like thirsted after. I'm like, we need women's bodies, like in everything. And like, if there's not a sexy woman in this ad or this movie or this story, and like, you know, everything's gonna fall apart. But it's like you're given all this like godlike power, but then it's like you're also like, it's so controlled. And if you want to actually just kind of figure things out on your own, it's like, whoa, if it's not in relation to men and how they feel, and like, if we can't, it's just so hard to even, it's like, so like, you're like, this is a thing that you now have to grapple with for the rest of your life. But also like, if you grapple with it too confidently, or like just for yourself or not for men, like, we're going to try to repress and control and like call you a slut or call you whatever. It's like, you know, it's just like, why can't women just be like complex, autonomous beings, which I do feel is a privilege afforded to most men. And, you know, Vincent did bring up a really good point about like some men benefit much more from that, right, than others by leaning into a very patriarchal version of masculinity. But any thoughts on that? Did that make sense? Like, I know that was a lot.
None.
At all.
No, I am reminded to like do like an intersectional, like pull into race. I think it's interesting. Even so, just, again, being honest, a lot of times when I do think about these things, as of the past couple years in deconstruction, it's as a patriarchy as it relates to masculinity and toxic masculinity. And there's this gut whenever you're part of and I even hate saying oppressor because I feel like it sounds dramatic, but it literally is applicable in this case. But like when you're part of the group that is on the top of the hierarchy in the status quo, there's this gut reaction where you turn these critiques about you. And I'm reminded of like Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, right? Like the whole way of speaking about racism, but centering whiteness at it. Like in that conversation, it's like, well, no, like quite literally, we don't need to center whiteness when we talk about racism against black people. So I feel like that happens a lot when it comes to speaking about patriarchy or feminists. It's the immediate response of centering men because it's like uncomfortable to not have men as the center of the conversation. So I'm just reminded of that. Also, I think it's interesting when it comes to like women's sexuality. I'm not illusioned at all. I understand that I don't live somewhere that is indicative of the whole country, but it's definitely very interesting to spend so much time in a place like Los Angeles. A lot of my good friends are in other, you know, urban areas, places like New York that are pretty and relatively progressive, right? Like they're not some utopia. And then to come home to North Carolina for a few weeks and see just the difference in posture, because I do think there are places where women's sexuality are treated. I wouldn't be. I don't want to say the same. Like I'm sure if I bring my friends on here, they would disagree. But it does feel like it's treated a lot more in parallel with men's sexuality. So it's interesting to see that that's the case. And guess what? LA hasn't burned to the ground. Like it didn't end our culture as we know it. Just to
well, the wildfires right now. I'm joking.
Yeah, actually, maybe that is God's response.
God's punishing you. God.
You have a point. I think it was Pat Robinson, 700 Club, that said that New Orleans happened because of the gays. So I think the California wildfires did happen because of women's sexuality.
Because of
just
crop
being
tops.
honest.
Yeah.
Because of crop tops. Yeah. And because of never mind. But what were you gonna say?
Well, I was just gonna say you bring up a really good point, but also like that's talking about like, okay, communities and areas, but like look at Kamala Harris. Like, can you imagine if she were to wear like a dress?
I literally can't. Like I literally can't.
Exactly.
Imagine.
Like, and that's the highest level of power in our country. Like women
that's fair.
Are so policed in how, and even in the debates, like whether you can agree a lot or agree a little, but I think all women agree that it was so obvious in the debates, like the gendered nature of how much emotional labor she was having to exert to not be called all the things that women get called when they are in positions of power because it's so upsetting to so many people. But
are you referring to just curious? I do know of like there's this tendency to paint women that are very proactive in their careers as just like out to, I don't know, like paint them as just like this career hungry driven but in like a negative light. Is that what you're referring to, or how else are women in power painted?
No, I feel like women in power very quickly and easily get called things like shrill or irrational or
Uh,
emotional. Or, like, can you imagine if Kamala in her debate with Mike Pence had exhibited a fourth of the behavior Trump exhibited in his first? Can you imagine her as a Black woman? She has no room to be a human. She had to be exactly how she could be the most like appealing to the most number of people. And of course all politicians have to do that, but if you don't recognize that the weight is so much heavier on women, like, you're not paying attention.
I'm
Not
also
you. Yeah.
reminded too of this weird obsession in her history of like an affair that she may or may not had that wasn't actually an affair. I forget with who in California, but like,
Mm.
name me one other presidential candidate from this year that they had like media focus on their past. It wasn't like she was married and she cheated on somebody. It was like a romantic interest that she may or may not had. It was like this weird fixation that it was a big piece of her. Like that's how she got to where she was as California's attorney general.
The way Michelle Obama's wardrobe was constantly scrutinized and right, like she showed her, it's in every
Uh,
facet. Yeah. Um what about you, Kevin, as far as that barrage of questions and like how it comes down to just like this idea of like controlling women's sexuality? Like what are your honest thoughts on that?
Um, I'm ha-
He's smiling.
Spit it.
repeat the exact question of like how come women can't be complex but also sexual, but then be seen outside of the sexual as complex and more than that, whereas opposed men are afforded that. Is that kind of like afforded that luxury? Is that kind of the general question?
It's a good question. Is that the question? Okay, I need to condense this into one. It's just the idea that women can't both be like very comfortable and engaging with their sexuality and be like very aware of the patriarchy and combating it. And I asked a bunch of other questions that were kind of like similar, but
Ah,
yeah, it's like maybe we'll cut this, but it comes down to this idea. I'm trying to think out loud of like, because women's sexuality is so, and if you look historically, it seems pretty obvious, like going way back, like control over women's sexuality has been a thing for so long, like for so long. And it's just this idea that because it's so central in like sort of the fight, like that it's like, but if it's like a lose-lose, because then it's like if you engage with it still today in so many circles, people will, I don't know, actually I lost my train. Season 2. I don't know how to say it. It's so like it's like one of those truths I was mentioning where it's like I've always known it and felt it, and like
mm-hmm.
every woman I know to some degree has like,
Yeah,
well, not every, but all my
a
close
lot,
friends,
a lot, a
yeah,
lot of
they
women.
all know what I'm talking about, but I don't know how to exactly like say it.
So to respond to the idea of women who can be conventionally beautiful or sexy, but then if they were to have a voice and a POV against the patriarchy, it's suddenly like there's this clash or this like a chord is off in the guitar in the band, and it's like people, it's almost like unpleasant for like the male mind to like try to receive that. Um,
Well, not even the male mind, like women, like again, maybe we'll have to cut this
mm,
because, but like it's like the idea you can't be someone who's actively regularly talking about these things and post a
yeah,
selfie that like isn't just like by happenstance attractive, a selfie where like you're wanting to attract male attention, like
yeah.
Is it bad to say and cut it if it is? But that to me, that's like super attractive. Like if you're like super fuck the patriarchy, but then you're like a baddie, I'm like, damn. Like to me, that's peak. Is that
That's so bad.
is that
well, for some men that no, that's I don't think that's bad at
You
all.
pig.
I think
You
that's the goal, is like
nah.
not even the goal, but it's the goal that there's space for that. And a lot of that backlash comes from women too, and from women to themselves, where it's
It
like, and the
does.
fact they have to go through
Self
those
hate.
gymnastics of like, oh, am I allowed to both critique? Again, it's like there's no in between not wanting to be treated as a literal sex object and harassed, and then like also recognizing like I enjoy attention from whoever, whether you're attracted to men or women, whoever, and like I'm allowed to like engage with that without like supporting a system in which I'm viewed as a sex object. Like,
Yeah.
again, it's like, why? Because it's so bad, it's almost this feeling like you have to just not be, which is something, yeah, I've definitely like dealt with.
Is it a kind of a conversation that might go way longer than we have time
Yeah.
for? But like the idea of um, like being sexualized but having sexuality, and like you can't have
Like
your
that
sexuality
Insta thing.
on display without being sexualized, and like it removes any other like your sexuality is just one facet of you, right? But like when you put that out onto the internet, it flattens just to being sexualized. Does that make
That's
sense?
definitely a big part of it. Do you remember that little Instagram thing I sent you guys that was like about being sexualized versus being sexual, when I had my little freak out about the eggplant emoji, which looking back, I think I way overreacted, and it wasn't against you. It was just like, we could have left that in and it would have been literally fine.
I do remember. I do remember it, kind of.
I'll resend it if you want to. Yeah, it's
Oh,
definitely like,
I remember because I read that shit and it triggered the dog. Leslie, and rather than answering, because I think I'm too ignorant, but a part of my ideology was like, ask her this. My question is, I don't think it's to the same degree that women undergo it, but don't you think men undergo it as well? Like when LeBron James was told to shut up and dribble when he had political opinions, like.
oh, for sure, for sure.
So I
Season two,
think
please.
Season 2.
Please.
No,
Please,
seriously,
please.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because
for sure.
Sorry,
I
that was
thought
for Leslie. I just got triggered and got excited. But sorry, I'll mute myself now.
that because that Vince literally muted himself. We're doing a podcast. Um, the thought came from because like Leslie is right because I'm gonna say my experience or at least my felt
Okay.
experience
Yeah.
and which led to that thought. My felt experience was I have a unique privilege as Kevin Ortiz, which is this. I can write poetry, but so when I got into fitness, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to break the mold of what a typical gym rat guy looks like and acts like, because people are going to see me and they don't hear me talk. When people see me walking around my job, it happens to me. People see I've been, and I know I can see it in the energy of people, men and women's eyes. I've had more comments about my physique, about my looks, about my body shape, about my build since I started working out. People just like, and I'm wearing a tank top and like women just like shamelessly gazing at my biceps. Like just because I work out doesn't mean I'm okay with you. So I realized like I had this fun little game I like to play amongst society where I knew you're going to see me and I know there's going to be some preconceived notions if you don't know me. But then the moment I open my mouth to do poetry at a talent show or in my workplace, which I've done before for like an all-staff meeting for like a colonel at a base in Texas, there's going to be this fucking like screeching noise of like, oh shit, like it's hard to fit him in a box of he's just some over masculine man who plays sports, manly man, me big, me dumb, me eat meat, chug beer. And then like I can't just fit him into a box of like the artistic, effeminate poet, soft playing a harp, and you're just a little so like, but at the same time, that's unique to my specific experience. And also additionally, I don't think it's done as much to men where we fit them into the boxes of either sports player, athlete over masculine, or like mama's boy in the kid. I think it's more so done to women. But I just wanted to like bring up the conversation of like, I think it happens to both genders, but it is definitely, at least I would agree. I could be wrong. I would agree it happens more and it's more at the hurt of women. But I think that's like a human tendency for us to do, right? Like that's a human, like we as
Well, it is
humans, we
human,
just,
but it's tied to an entire structure. It's because it happens to men, but it happens to women in context of an entire, once again, like individual, like institutional and cultural system that does explicitly harm
but
women more than
isn't
men.
it those same institutional cultural constructions that also hurt the man as well in that conversation? Like how
Oh,
do you
I
tell
definitely think
like
patriarchy
how
hurts men.
like how
It's
do you tell
just,
LeBron James is gonna like own, like how do you tell LeBron James dog, like whoever that lady was, like this is not like Jay-Z had a rap freestyle line where um he said, you know, when I work, you know I'm not your slave, right? You know I'm not shucking and jiving, high fiving, you know this ain't back in the day, right? He basically talking about like I'm an intelligent, like fuck entertainment, rapper, sports player, media personality. Jay-Z's like, I'm a businessman. You realize I'm a billion-dollar enterprise, me and my wife individually. All the things that are typically associated with white persons, which is like ownership and running something and building something, as opposed and versus and in contrast to things that are associated with black people, entertainment, sports, performance. He was trying to make the statement of like, this issue that black males are very familiar with, which is you're often seen as the mule, the donkey, the racehorse. So I just want to. I'm not trying to pull the conversation away from. I just think there's a deeper diagnostic issue within society as a whole, and it expresses itself sometimes in relation to men as well as women. But I do agree that it's I as a man I would rather err on the side of saying it affects and hurts women more than it does men.
It does.
No, I'm sorry.
Affect, yeah, I agree with you. Just saying that. But yeah, Vince.
I was gonna say a primer. I don't want to pull this into like a man-centered conversation in this talk, but a primer. Well, the LeBron James thing I read is more racial than around him being a man. That felt very racist to me. But a primer for all of us. ContraPoints men video, and then I'll see you in season 2 because I got some motherfucking thoughts on patriarchy as it relates to masculinity in men. But I'll
but you know what? But real quick, 2 seconds, because I didn't answer Leslie's question.
Okay.
I will say I'm very guilty of that. I have some disagreements because me personally, not men. I've seen men. I work in the military, so I know men who do this. Who they'll see a sexy woman in the military, but the moment she speaks her opinion, whether she's in the pilot school trying to be a pilot, and the entire hierarchy of pilots like deny her a very important position that she's more. I've had men pilots tell me this. There's a good old boys club in the military of pilots who they'll literally work against a woman who's more competent than the other men in getting one of the best slotted positions for a female pilot because she's opinionated and doesn't fit into the. So what I'm trying to say is I'm very well aware of the fact that my experience of not allowing women to be both sexy and complex and opinionated and valid in both of those arenas doesn't indicate that all men are like this. So my disagreement isn't necessarily valid to try to defend all men. It's just defending me. But I do think there is a very real issue of, yeah, Leslie's right. Men have this weird, especially, and there's a lot of stupid men. A lot of men do this unfair thing. There has to be a level of accountability. A lot of men do this unfair thing where because it's natural for a man to have attraction to a woman or one person to have attraction to another, but speaking of a heterosexual male in relation to a heterosexual female, there is this weird thing where women have a stronger disadvantage in life the moment they open their mouth if the POV with which they open their mouth is in contrast to the stances of that male. And God forbid that male is in a position of power to hinder that woman from advancing socially, professionally, or in any area of her life that she desires to advance. And this is a very real thing. And I have nuanced perspectives on it that are specific to me. But as a general rule of thumb, I very much so agree with Leslie. This is just to validate you're right and it's wrong, and I've seen it and I've witnessed it and I still witness it. And just because it's not my lived experience doesn't mean that it's invalid. I very much so see it rampant within a lot of men, and it's a problem, and any man who acts like that should be disgusted of themselves. And all men who don't agree with that, you should speak up and speak out and help to progress and advance the agenda of women in this specific issue. Like fucking the same way with race and white people or supporters of non-black supporters of black people. Men and women, stand up when you see that shit. Speak out when you see that shit, because that is a very real issue, and we see it and we know it. And Joe Rogan made a joke about it where like a woman will be like, I want you to respect me. And Joe Rogan made the joke about that kind of man where the man goes, I do respect you, but I want to fuck you, so I'm confused. And so there's this very real thing.
Don't be confused. You can do both.
That's what I'm saying. And so it's speaking to the idea, like men, like we have to evolve, we have to grow, we have to advance. And men and women should speak more about this thing, because when you don't, the people who are in positions of power, if they don't see the mass speaking about it, they'll consider it invalid and only the opinion of those few select marginalized women. So all that to say, I think we should be more vocal about this all across the board.
Come on, slam poetry.
Amen. Yeah, good thing I wasn't drunk, or I would have been doing what I did last time.
Dear God.
Okay. Vincent, did you have any other? I mean, we're kind of out of time.
I appreciate the space. And I encourage anyone that's listening to this that knows me or doesn't know me, any woman, I if you have thoughts on anything I said or to anything that any one of us said, I'm very intrigued to hear your thoughts.
Yes, please.
If you've made this far. If there's no comments, we know that y'all motherfuckers is never mind. Never mind.
Well, I really enjoyed this space too, and I 100% retweet and agree that yes, patriarchy affects men in insidious ways that I feel strongly about, and I'm really excited to talk about them in season 2. So stick around for that. Um, if you want anyone, at least I feel this way, like anyone who's interested, we can share the link to our little Google Doc if you want, because there is more here and juicy stuff.
We
that could,
should. We should
yeah.
link that in the YouTube video or something.
Well, maybe just people who ask. I don't know if I feel that comfortable. But
All
we'll see.
fair.
Uh, but yeah. In other news, bringing this back, anyone who was paying attention to the level that you noticed we used to end our episodes with in other news and stopped. Thank you to you for paying so close attention. But in other news, I was in the top 0.05% of listeners for my Spotify Wrapped top artist this year. And I tagged them on Instagram, like, yeah, I was in the top, just like not big. And they replied, and we're actually like having a whole conversation. And I'm just super amazed and thankful because I'm getting to end 2020 by like having a conversation with an artist who I respect and have like just gleaned so much light and beauty from. And yeah, like that's my other news.
Thank you for listening to the Bottomless Podcast. This is BTTMLESS. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen. We talking, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Bottomless.